Hi class. So now that you have finished your hand sculpture, I'm going to do a little short tutorial on how to hollow them out and then put them back together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it off of the armature, and that's just going to be sliding, kind of wiggling it little by little, trying to get that stick to come through without too much damage. Okay, so we can set the armature aside. You're going to have a couple of little holes here that what you want to do is just get some water. I'll just pull the top off my spray bottle and get some water in those holes. Right down in there. So I'm going to just rest my hand here on the table. It's pretty stiff at this point. It's I would say like a stiff leather hard. It's not going to warp by setting it down or make marks from the table. But I still need a little bit of moisture in there so I can cut it apart, score it, and get it back together. So I'm going to take a little coil like that, and I'm going to taper the end. And I'll just get a little water on that, and I'm going to kind of slide that into the hole as far as it will go. Then I'll break it off, and I'll taper it again like that. Same thing. And I'll go from the other side of that hole right here. And I want to try and push that as far in as possible, and you can really pack that clay in pretty firm. You are trying to taper it so that you don't accidentally trap an air bubble inside of the sculpture. So I'm just going to compress, and that little bit of water that we put both in the hole and on the coil should help it to really adhere without too much difficulty, as long as your hand is not too dry to begin with. So you can see the inside of the palm, just kind of smooth that over. This hole here, I only have the one entrance that didn't come out the other side. So I'll get a little water there. And I'll put a little water on this coil so it's tapered, and I'll just kind of slot that in, and then I'll really kind of compress that clay down into that hole and just kind of keep folding it over. And I can just use my knife, or you can use a serrated rib if you have one of those with you at home, and this is going to help just blend that into surrounding area. And then you can use a smooth metal rib or a rubber rib. If you're still seeing a lot of texture because the clay is dry, just get a little water on it. And then use that smooth rib. Okay, so we took care of the holes. The next part is figuring out what part of the hand actually needs to get hollowed out. If it is an inch or thinner, you don't need to really worry about it. So I'm not going to worry about any of the fingers or even the apple. I think that that's okay. It's really right here in the pad of my hand that is too thick that I need to hollow out. So to do that, I'm going to just use my knife, and I'm going to cut the hand across right there all the way through. so that it's in two pieces. And I'll just make a straight line, score, and I'm going to try and avoid, however you decide to cut the hand, just try and avoid any high detail areas. If you do have to cut through a finger, try not to cut like through the nail. You know, that would be take more time to repair. So I'm just going to keep scoring a little bit deeper each time. Like I said, this clay is a stiff leather hard, so it is a little bit difficult to cut through. If your clay is too stiff, then I recommend where you're going to make that incision to cut the hand, that you take like a damp tea towel or cloth and wrap it around the area where you're going to make the incision, and let it sit for about 15-20 minutes to soften that area. So I'm almost there. I'm going to make one more cut. Another option is you can take your wire tool. Let me see if I have my wire tool. I like to use the knife a little bit better because it makes a nice straight line. The wire tool is a little bit harder to control, but it does work and it does go back together just fine. So I'm gonna just make sure that I don't let it fall as soon as I cut. There we go. Okay, so you can see this little hole right here, that is a trapped air bubble, and that is what would make my piece explode in the kiln. So I'm really glad that I cut it open. You can see how thick the hand is here and here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just your needle tool and I'm going to kind of trace maybe about a 1/2 inch thick little border here. Like that. And then I'm going to take my loop tool. You should have a big one and a small one. And I'm going to scoop it out like a pumpkin. So just going to come through here and take out all that clay. The clay on the inside where it's thicker is going to be softer than the clay along the outside, because the outside's been exposed to all that air. So this will be kind of a hard shell, and the inside should be a little bit softer and easier to scoop. I do recommend cutting your hand apart, scooping it out, and reassembling it all in one session, because you want to make sure that the two halves that you cut go back together while they're the same stiffness. If you cut them apart and then you come back another session and one side's been scooped out and the other hasn't, sometimes it can make it hard to get them back together seamlessly. So I'm finding other air pockets trapped inside here, and so anytime I see that, I just want to take my loop tool and scoop until I've really gotten that air pocket out. So my hand may be a little bit bigger than what you made. If your entire hand is, I'd say, 1 inch or thinner, then you can probably leave it solid. I'd say it doesn't hurt to err on the side of caution by scooping it out if you're concerned. Don't try and make the walls too thin. You don't want to compromise the structural integrity of your sculpture. We just want to make sure that it survives being fired once we're back on campus and are able to get them into kilns. Okay, so you can see I'm starting to create about as deep a cavity as I possibly can. I'm following the contour of the hand. And I don't think I brought a small loop tool home with me, which is making this a little bit harder because I really want to reach all the way in there. So I'm going to see if I have another tool that will work. Well, I have just kind of a little spade tool. So I'm going to get in there, scoop this out. And so I'm going to do this as far as I can reach, checking just with my hands for any thin spots. If you accidentally do punch through when you're scooping out, just take some fresh soft clay, wet the surrounding area, and then take that clay and compact it from both inside and outside, and then you can use a rib to smooth it out and it should be fine. Definitely use soft fresh clay when you are doing that instead of the clay that you've just scooped out. That added moisture will increase the likelihood that it'll all stick together without issue. So I'm not going to sit here for the whole demo, but once you've scooped out both sides to the same thickness, and try and maintain the thickness here about 1/2 inch all the way through, as far down as you can reach, and then you're going to score the edges and you're going to attach them back together, and then you want to stitch that seam and take your knife, the side of your knife, and score deep across that seam to stitch it, and then a serrated rib to kind of smooth it over, and then a smooth rib, and you won't see that seam line reappear. After you get the whole piece back together, you just want to take a needle tool and make sure that you poke one little tiny air hole into this cavity. If you forget that, it could blow up because you have one giant air cavity. So just make sure somewhere discreet that you poke one tiny air hole and you should be good. All right.